Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Global Book Network, the show where we sit down with provocative authors and talk about their crafts. My name is Flobo Boys, and I, for one, am excited to be here today because my guest really got me thinking about how prepared we are for disasters. I don't want to say they're inevitable, but it does happen pretty often in waves. So please welcome the author of the book Building Christian Resilience, Roger Fraumann, to the show. Roger, talk to me, man. How's life?
I'm doing well, Flobo. It's a lot colder here up in Minnesota.
Yeah,
That's
you
for
know what?
sure.
I've been to Minnesota once. Minnesota nice is real. Here in Los Angeles, it's balmy 55 degrees.
There you go.
Well, before we even hit the record button, we were talking about how you got this book together. I mean, you talk about the research process seems to be very, very layered. I got to ask the first question. The first one that popped into my mind is right behind you on those screens is a stack of diaries. So telling me you were on the ground really put these things together.
Yep, sure have. The basically the diaries when FEMA was my third career. I spent 12 years in the field working disasters, everything from Katrina all the way up to Sandy, and in a variety of roles. And basically, one of the things that I have practiced throughout life is having a diary, a book where I keep details each day, who I meet, I tape in the business cards, that kind of thing. And it's been used for a number of congressional inquiries and that kind of thing because, people might misunderstand FEMA. So let's understand, most of my FEMA experience is pre-DHSizing it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the feet on the ground, serious work in the field. So I learned along the way several patterns that I want to share with the audience, and I tried to capture all the wisdom that I learned in a book. And it's the third time I've written it, so it's down to 118 pages. All right.
Right.
Um, so, but it's basically, fair warning here. It's a not a fiction. There's not a line of fiction in the book. It's a
Mm-hmm.
non-fiction book. So warning, okay? Because everybody's used to reading fiction books. But the driving point of it is that as a great grandfather, I want to share the wisdom. That's what it's about.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing too, because my parents still live in Brooklyn and they were spared the effects of Superstorm Sandy by like 3 or 4 blocks. Like they live in the southeast corner, like over there by the bay. And so that was kind of hit home for us that it just seems that there's always a threat that seems to be threatening other people. We never quite have the right response in place. Is that by design? Is it because these things are always a moving target? Why do we always feel like we're one step behind?
Let's I'm going to go, I'm going to go into how I structured with the book because the first book was 230 pages, right?
Mhm.
So the feedback was over my head. I wrote it
Right.
on a shelf over my head. Um, but the takeaways are this: the book, I tried to break it down to 8 chapters. First chapter, to keep it simple, is joy is first. Now, the reason why that lesson came home over and over for me was driven home: Jesus, others, and yourself, joy. And you go into a disaster area, most of the time, the guidance is for the first week or so, depending on size of disaster, no less than two. So
Mhm.
you and a second person or you in a group. And but I would typically find myself easily being drawn in going alone. Well, you're not alone if you got Jesus. So for the atheists out there, that's another thing to visit. Happy to talk with you about that separate. But the issue is that people suffering through a disaster, regardless of whether it is a personal tragedy, I've had a number of people say, "Look, my divorce was harder than Sandy." Okay, I get it. Um, so you got it. I'm sorry, I had emotional. You got to take it a joy first. Second
Mhm.
is when you talk about disasters, one of the things that I did in FEMA is I wrote up a spreadsheet. I've worked with computers since 70, wrote up a spreadsheet defining types of disasters, size of disasters, a grid. And it forced a complete redefinition on an awful lot of things. But let's start with this. Anytime you're facing a disaster event, either it is catastrophe of God, biblically, or chaos of man.
Mhm.
So understand what you're going into. Is this of God or is this of man? And if it's of man, typically there may be a twist to it because man's pretty devious and not everything is necessarily fact. There may be a lot of distortion. So you've got to conserve resources. You got to be smart in how you approach it. And the second piece of that, of the smartness of approaching a disaster, is that I learned living in California, a number of firefighters after a major wildfire spent some time and green lighting on how better to intercooperate. And they came up with the kernel of an idea 20 some years ago, ICS, Incident Command, which is today required understanding and training for all emergency responders in America. And I picked up a number of countries have adopted it as well. So it's a standardized method or process where you can have incident command and then you call it OPAL, operations planning, administration, and logistics. And that's clearly understood. Anytime you come in and work within that structure, you understand your role or who to report to within your role. And so, okay, third chapter is a focus on time urgency rules because 9 times out of 10, depending on your type of disaster, time may be crucial, such as, is a person bleeding out? Is there an emergency, issue of security? So we've got 3 seconds to solve a bleeding out problem. Get to it. Three
Mhm.
seconds. What's in 3 minutes? Air. If a person's not breathing, you got 3 minutes. If hours, shelter. Well, why is that important? Oh, it might have something to do with, is the person adequately clothed or sheltered to prevent hypothermia? In other words, 56 degrees or below, people can die or get a severe stress to the body, which leads to death because of inadequate protection. So a lot of people also don't wear hard sole shoes. A
Mhm.
lot of people run around sneakers. Well, unfortunately, in disaster areas, particularly if wind is involved, my experience is that almost every board that has a nail in it, for some reason, lands nail up.
Right. Unfortunate.
And it's unfortunate because I see good people that are needed in a disaster area head out because their foot's going to get infected. Okay, chapter 4 is an issue of now that we've established, gone through time urgency, shelter, potable water. You're going to, in 3 days, potable water becomes an issue. This is why I remind, and I've spoken hundreds of times, I remind the audience that look, your shelter, how many of you drove here? Or do you park your car in the garage? You don't have a great big budget to prepare, but may I suggest a little bit of prepping that you can do, and I'm not afraid of using the word prepping. Treat your car as a lifeboat. This is a U.S. Coast Guard approved food for your car. Well, for your boat, all right? But if you have boats, get two of them. The point is that this is coconut based. Anybody of any persuasion, age, and all that kind of stuff, it tastes all, it's great, but it's food. It's 200 calories. If you're running on the margin, this is better than zero, and it's at least 5 years shelf life. I've pushed the margin. I've run 10, and along with this, I get some dehydrated water packets, little 6-ounce packets of water. Bunch of these in the packets. Put that in a Ziploc bag or a couple of them. Put it down by the spare tire, and now everywhere you go in your car, you got, let's say, 3 days of food and water, depending on your budget.
Yeah.
And when you park your car at home, you've got 3 days of food, emergency food and water in your home. Okay, it's little things like that. You go on down through what's the crucial issue, food, 3 weeks. And then you'd have a little bit of time to rebuild your community, because frankly, the best book, let me see if I can grab it here for you. This is the finest book on, everybody says prepping, bug out. You want a good book on bug out? This one. By the way, I'm not compensated for any of this.
Right.
Okay. This is the best book. You want the best book on bug out? Here you go. Bottom line is, why bug out if you're in a community that you love and trust? You're an asset in the community, even if you just do fire guard at night. That's a useful role.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has to take care of the kids. Somebody has to take care of the elderly on down the line. A takeaway is this. In Katrina, over half of the deaths in Katrina were for people over 65.
Mm-hmm.
They're not visible.
Right.
All right. Next. Great book from the military. Left to Bang. The issue is bang. In other words, instead of waiting for the adversary to shoot at you, be aware and sensitive of the surroundings and what's going on. Situational awareness. Master situational awareness. You'll do better in virtually any disaster or chaotic situation. Excellent book.
So I like the fact that you do compile your research in a way that people can actually search it. But actually, before we went live on this call, you were saying that at the end of the book, your book, Building Christian Resilience, there is a compendium of hyperlinks and your dedication to making sure the information is up to date as possible.
It is, yeah. I mean, I try to maintain it. In the back of the book, there's a bunch of pages. But look, folks, I understand you are a reader of paper, okay? You're not going to type this stuff in. I got 407 links in here and all through the book. So you go, it says 202. Okay. You go to 202 in the book. Is it current? All that kind of thing. You go to the website instead. And in the book says 202, you go to buildingchristianresilience.com, go to 202, click on it, and the link is made there for you. And I try my best to go through about once a week. I have to update a link because it goes south. And feedback is going to be useful. So anyway, chapter 4, to give you an idea. Again, I tried to break this up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's why it's laid out this way. So once you've read it and you think about it, you don't have to have the book in a disaster. You've got it. What's your 4 response priorities? What's most important, second, third, and fourth? Safety, security, sanitary, and shelter. 4 S's. You can't do it wrong. Safety, security, shelter, and sanitary, sanitary and shelter, all right? And sanitary includes keeping your food from spoiling, having potable or drinkable water, because trust me, you get bad water, your disaster is a whole lot worse, because how far are you from a toilet? And shelter. There's all kinds of ways of addressing shelter issues. Again, I'm not a wealthy man, low budget, but the simple take-home things that I've seen that works in disasters. So the same kind of thing. Number 5. Okay. 5 disaster management stages. And this is what FEMA uses and other people do as well. And I have links aiming you for everything. Everybody else knows a lot more than I do. But the 5 stages, and I list them as stages and not phases because I've reserved the word phases for people. Stages: prevention, mitigation, preparation, and then response and recovery. And as a side note, going from response to recovery is typically after 3 days because people dehydrate out. So if you haven't recovered the people in a sizable disaster area, you got 3 days to do it.
Yeah.
That's your time urgency.
Can I interject here and ask a question about
Yeah.
faith? Is that okay? Sometimes you have these giant disasters or things coming at you, and I can see the atheist perspective of I'm just going to prepare, or I'm not going to take the time to. But what about the other side? And I say that because I grew up in a very religious community, and when things happen like blizzards or floods in the neighborhood, there was a section of my family that would say, "I'll just pray about it. I don't have to prepare. God has me." Have you come across that in your research? Those who kind of lean too much into just, hey, why prepare? I just pray.
When I present, I get typically 2 throwaways comments aimed in my direction. One is I leave it to God, right? Well, there's the old story about the man's tied on an island, deserted island, says, "God, rescue me." And along comes a boat. They offer him, and he says, "Oh, no, God's taking care of me. I don't need you." I mean, so he turns away all these attempts to rescue him and keeps going, "God, why aren't you saving me?" God goes, "Well, I tried 3 times."
Right.
Frankly, it's your job. It's those in the community. It's those around us to help those in need. Who's doing that? If you think you're waiting on God to do that, God's waiting on you to do that. So, number 2 is the other throwaway comment is I got a gun. I know where you live. You're all prepped. You have a year's worth of food, all this kind of stuff. And so I'm just going to get it. And I might have one too, so you get these excuses of why I don't have to do heavy lifting, when in fact it's light lifting if you do it over time and you do it with wisdom. And let me just throw this out, okay? A lot of people say disasters and they think hurricane, tornadoes. Hey, some of the worst disasters in America are drought. Goes for years. Doubt me? Go read stories about the Dust Bowl in America. It affects everything. And I mean, there's tons of things you can do. All right. So that's why I focus in the 5th chapter. I turn it to people. Chapter 6 is focused on stages for emotional response because we're mere people. All right. We leave a lot of things to God, and I trust to God every day. Yes, I do. But emotional stages such as, and I've gotten feedback, particularly from mothers with autistic children, lots of other stressors in life, and they come back and go, that sounds familiar. Well, it's interesting, but that's why I consciously, and purists in the military will say, well, there's 5 disaster management phases. No, actually stages. I have changed the vocabulary, sorry. And then 6 emotional response phases, meaning there's pre-disaster, pre-emotional event or pre-disaster impact, heroic, the amygdala gland in the book. There's different ways of different levels or degrees of response that humans respond to after impact in a disaster. And then that heroic response, which may or may not be advised, you end up with a little bit of overrun, but it's the honeymoon phase. If things are a little bit better, honeymoon phase. And so your guard's down. you're not following through on some things you need to be doing, then you run into disillusionment phase. An example being the electricity's back on. Hey, the world is perfect. However, the garbage is not getting hauled.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Right.
Um, and then you get into recovery phase. And actually, for the community, that is where you're reaching out, and that's where the churches make a huge difference. I've seen it over and over again in the disaster area. And then chapter 7 is focused on logistics. And a lot of people say, I want a year's worth of food. I want blah, blah, blah. Bottom line, it doesn't cost much. And you can store 10 years storage life at minimum or 20 years storage life, dehydrated food. It assumes you have water, potable water. All right. Don't take water for granted. All right. It's a
Absolutely.
big deal. It's hard to make water drinkable again once it's gone south. And people, I lived in California for a dozen years, almost 20. But the swimming pools now increasingly have salt added. It removes other chemicals. I get it, but it's saline. But now you go to the swimming pool, you have saline water. It's not salt water, which is a whole lot more salt to it, but you might want to look into drinking straws, disposable drinking straws that filter your water, that take out the saline of the water in the book.
Yeah.
And so you might want to have that because you may have a swimming pool full of water, but it has salt in it. And it goes on like that. And so you end up with the logistics standpoint, started with the car, 3 days of food and water in the car. That's a good start. And then you can have a couple of cases of bottled water at home, then you rotate through those and a little bit here, a little bit there. And you don't shelf life your budget to death. Okay. The other issue is I recommend, there's a old military term, 2 is 1, 1 is none, meaning it was taught, special forces in particular, training, have a plan and then have a backup plan because everything goes south the first time thing, first shot is fired, your plan goes in the bucket. Have a backup plan. Or let's apply it to logistics. If 2 is 1, 1 is none, meaning if it's good for you and you need to have it, the probability is somebody else in your neighborhood needs it too. 2 is 1, 1 is none. That's a good start. And so other major component to logistics is the communications, because radio communications, for example, or light or speaking voice, whistles, all of that kind of stuff means you're not lugging around pounds to do things. You've covered a gap of communications. Okay, now what's else important with that? I recommend having a little FRS radio. I got one around here somewhere. I just gave away 10 of them to a neighbor. I got them somewhere. Little FRS radios. You can get them at Walmart. And what's good for that is you get ones that run on AA batteries, have a bunch of extras, but it enables you to communicate for your community without opening the front door.
Mm-hmm.
What value is that? How many people can confidently feel as though they can go in their basement and talk to the neighbor with a little FRS radio? So it doesn't mean you have to be a ham to be able to communicate with your neighbors or a neighborhood. FRSs work great for a neighborhood. You worked great in New York City between the restaurants that used FRS radios because one runs out of this food, one runs out of this one in the kitchen, and they can use radios to communicate between each other. Used in hospitals. How do you order a med from the pharmacy down on the second floor? You're up in third floor or fourth floor in the operating room. Urgently, we need blah. And if the radio system or the communication system in the hospital is offline, You got a fallback,
Right.
and they're virtually disposable. Okay, a pair is like $100, and it's then this next stage up is I found very useful. One of these. It's a CB radio. And what's the value of this? Well, it saved me 3 hours of sleep when I was exhausted in FEMA, and I had inbound semi vans coming in. I was able to communicate with the semis in the dark, in the weather.
Right.
What's that worth? A truckload of water coming in. Okay, then you get into, so citizens band basically county-wide communication, meaning if your sheriff's cars are enabled with CB radio, not only it gives you a ability to communicate with no telephone, because telephone's one of the first things to go. Internet is going to go shortly thereafter. And then you get on now to multi-state, et cetera, communications, amateur radio. That's great. So now let's get into some of the applications in the book. And I talk about disaster risk considerations. And you go, boy, am I prepared? I got all this stuff. Well, let's take a look at why some things you may not think about are really important. And I talk about natural disasters, grid down, and there's lots of ways we can lose our national electric grid, such as coronal mass ejection, cyber, directed energy weapons, electromagnetic pulse, kinetic. At least 5 reasons why we can lose a national electric grid. And a local grid's easy to lose. But however, you go a step further and you talk about chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear. Well, that's all military stuff. Seaburn, what's he talking about? That, face mask. Okay. People go, I got a face mask and I can riot or something. I mean, look, folks, 9 times out of 10, a 5-mile-an-hour wind will take nasty stuff, a football field away in under a minute. Debilitating stuff. Why is that important? Because some stuff, such as mustard gas, and you go, well, where would I get mustard? Who has mustard gas in today's modern day? Well, guess what happens in a community? Happened to me. You go out and the local town says, we've been flooded between 4 and 12 feet. Go through all the houses, take all the plastic bottles out of the houses. So you end up with bottles of ammonia, bottles of bleach, bottles of all that stuff. Put them out by the roadside. Well, guess what ammonia and bleach combined creates? Mustard gas. So you go along, it may not be wise to have all those bottles next to each other. At least separate bleach from the rest of them. And oxidize. Separate keep the plastic bottles separate. So, okay, but a well-meaning, I want to keep the plastics because all that stuff has to go separate recycling. So I drain them into the storm sewer. And now you end up people going to the hospital, difficulty breathing. Do it to ourselves. And so there's some, things that happen in chemical, radiological, the nuclear. People survived Hiroshima, and there are survivors. And there are biographies and books about what lessons they learned surviving Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Talk about real nuclear disasters and not just a nuclear power plant problem. And they discovered that there are fundamental things they did by accident because they didn't know. They didn't even know what a nuclear bomb was.
Right.
But so it's this kind of thinking that having gone and tried to capture, and I'm passing along the wisdom of ages, and I can't make a fiction out of it. I'm making a nonfiction book, heavily documented, 407 hyperlinks of references, over 50 books. And I could keep walking you through an example.
Well, I just got to say, but the Building Christian Resistance book, Resilience book, it's available now, and I'm feeling anyone's watching the show right now, they can pretty much get the real brass tacks of everything. But here's the fun part there, Roger. People on the show want to know more about you. They want to know more about the book. How can they go about purchasing a copy so they can too be prepared for an eventual disaster?
Well, available most bookstores, Barnes & Noble, I know, online as well, Amazon. Just go to Amazon, type Fraumann.